You know what? I take it all back. Looks are not that important.
Rodney Dangerfield spent his entire career joking about getting no respect, but his final act might be the most legendary thing he ever did. Rumor has it that even as the end drew near, Rodney couldn't help but put on one last show, and the audience was none other than the king of late night, Johnny Carson. But what really happened in that quiet hospital room? Was it a final exchange of one-liners or a rare moment of vulnerability between two comedy icons? Join us as we pull back the curtain on the secret performance that comedy insiders are still talking about today. The mask of comedy, the childhood trauma that created Rodney Dangerfield. Long before he was the face of No Respect, the man we knew as Rodney Dangerfield was a boy named Jacob Cohen, born into a world that offered him very little of it. Growing up in Babylon, New York in 1921, his home life was a series of empty rooms and silent hallways. His father, a vaudevillian performer named Phil Roy, was a ghost who only appeared twice a year, leaving Jacob's Hungarian-born mother, Dorothy, to raise him. But Dorothy was emotionally distant, withholding the affection a young boy needs most. It was a cold start for a kid who would eventually spend his life begging for a warm reaction from a crowd. Living in the shadow of the Great Depression, the family was desperately poor. Jacob didn't have the luxury of a normal childhood. Instead, he worked a string of odd jobs just to keep the lights on. Because his mother was so detached, he spent most of his time wandering the streets of his neighborhood completely unsupervised. In his autobiography, It's Not Easy Being Me, he recounts a chilling memory from when he was just 5 years old. A man approached him and offered him a nickel, a small fortune back then, just to sit on his lap. To a hungry, lonely child, it seemed like a simple deal. Jacob sat there while the man held him and kissed him for several minutes, unaware of the predatory nature of the encounter. He even went back several times, chasing those nickels because no one was home to tell him any better. Later in life, Rodney would use his signature dark humor to call himself a male H-ker at age 5, but the punchline was a mask for a deep, lingering wound. He famously ended that story with a heartbreaking jab at his mother's neglect. "Thanks for looking after me, Ma." We spent decades laughing at Rodney's self-deprecating jokes, never realizing that the no respect bit wasn't just a clever gimmick, it was his reality from day one. He admitted that these early traumas could have turned him into a nasty person, but he chose a different path. He took all that childhood abandonment, the poverty, and the quiet pain of his youth, and turned it into the fuel that made the whole world laugh. Behind every bulging eye and every tug of his red tie was a man who had survived the unthinkable, proving that sometimes the funniest people are carrying the heaviest secrets. But while those secrets were forged in the silence of a lonely childhood, they eventually found a voice in the chaos of a comedy career that almost never happened. He didn't just walk onto a stage and become a star. He had to fail, quit, and completely reinvent himself before the world was ready to listen. The 9-year silence, when Jack Roy quit, and he was the only one who knew. By the time he was 15, most kids were worrying about school dances, but Jacob Cohen was already writing jokes for professional comics. He was talented, he was hungry, and he was ready to conquer the world, or so he thought. At 19, he legally changed his name to Jack Roy, hoping for a fresh start. But the comedy world didn't just ignore him, it practically shoved him out the door. For 9 years, he struggled through every indignity a performer can face, eventually working as a singing waiter until he was fired. With a wife and family to support and no spotlight in sight, he walked away from show business to sell aluminum siding. He later joked that he was so little known that when he quit, he was the only one who knew he had left. But the itch to perform never truly went away. By the early 1960s, while still working his day job as a salesman, he decided to give it one last shot. He returned to the stage at the small hotels in the Catskill Mountains, but success remained a ghost. He was drowning in $20,000 of debt and couldn't even get booked at the decent clubs. He famously quipped that he played one venue so far out in the woods that his act was reviewed in Field and Stream. He realized he was missing something vital, an image. He needed a persona that people could connect with, something that separated him from the sea of other guys in suits telling one-liners. The breakthrough finally came when he decided to lean into the failure. He stopped trying to be the cool guy on stage and started becoming the guy for whom nothing goes right. During a comeback bid at the Inwood Lounge in Manhattan, he wanted to hide his identity from old patrons who remembered him as a flop. He asked the club owner, George McFadden, for a new name. McFadden tossed out Rodney Dangerfield, a name that had popped up before on old radio shows and sitcoms. It stuck. Under this new mask, Jack Roy finally found his voice. Everything changed in March 1967 when he appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. The country didn't just laugh, they saw themselves in this sweating, nervous man who couldn't catch a break. Suddenly, he wasn't just a salesman, he was a superstar. He became a fixture on the Vegas Strip, a regular on The Dean Martin Show, and eventually made over 70 appearances on The Tonight Show. To keep the momentum going without the grueling travel, he opened his own club in New York City, simply called Dangerfield's. It wasn't just a home for him, it became a launch pad for the next generation of legends like Jerry Seinfeld, Jim Carrey, and Sam Kinison. Even as he reached the top, the no respect mantra became more than just a catchphrase. It was a cultural phenomenon. In 1980, his comedy album, No Respect, won a Grammy, and he even managed to become a pioneer in the early days of MTV. His song, Rappin' Rodney, was one of the first rap records to hit the Hot 100, featuring a music video where he's treated with so little respect that even the gates of heaven shut in his face. It was a joke everyone was in on, but for Rodney, the punchline always carried a bit of truth. The world saw a legend, but behind the scenes, he was still the kid who wasn't looked after. He made us roar with laughter by exposing his own insecurities, making us feel better about our own lives by mocking his. But while he was headlining Harvard's class day or winning awards, he was still carrying the weight of a childhood spent wandering the streets for nickels. We love the character, we love the tie-tugging, and we love the jokes, but we rarely stop to think about how much pain it took to build a persona out of being unwanted. Rodney Dangerfield spent his whole life proving that even if the world doesn't give you respect, you can still force it to give you a standing ovation. By the early 1980s, the man who spent decades feeling invisible finally became impossible to ignore. Rodney's big break on the silver screen didn't just happen. It exploded with the 1980 comedy classic Caddyshack. Playing Al Chervik, an obnoxious, loudmouthed property developer, Rodney brought a chaotic energy that the director couldn't get enough of. Alongside Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, Rodney improvised so many brilliant lines that his role kept growing, much to the annoyance of some of his more traditional castmates. Critics and fans alike agreed. The guy who got no respect was officially the king of the country club. This breakout performance paved the way for Rodney to become a genuine movie star in hits like Easy Money and Back to School. Interestingly, these roles flipped his stand-up persona on its head. On stage, he was a loser. On screen, he played characters who were successful, confident, and beloved by everyone, except the snobbish elite. He was the ultimate underdog who finally had the upper hand, and audiences loved seeing him win. Whether he was bowling in Miller Lite commercials or popping up in music videos for Billy Joel and Lionel Richie, Rodney was everywhere, his sweating, wide-eyed face becoming a symbol of 80s comedy. Even as he reached the top, Rodney never forgot the struggle of getting there. He became a guardian angel for rising talent, most notably a young Jim Carrey. After seeing Carrey perform in LA, Rodney signed him as his opening act in Vegas, mentoring him for years. Decades later, a superstar Jim Carrey would surprise Rodney on his 80th birthday just to say thank you. Rodney even earned a spot in the Smithsonian Institution, though he couldn't help but joke that they'd probably use his famous red tie to clean Lindbergh's plane. But underneath the fame, the hit movies, and the legendary status, that original pain never fully went away. We watched him play Lucifer in Adam Sandler's Little Nicky and laughed at his self-deprecating one-liners, but few realized he was still the same man who carried a childhood of neglect in his pocket. He gave the world everything he had: his laughter, his support for others, and his iconic style, all while quietly battling the ghosts of his past. Rodney Dangerfield showed us that you can be the funniest man in the room and the most respected legend in Hollywood, even if you spent your whole life feeling like you didn't belong. But before he was the king of the 80s, Rodney was a man who tried to trade the stage for a stable home, only to find that love could be just as turbulent as a Friday night at a dive bar. The surrender to normalcy. Why Rodney Dangerfield quit comedy for love. As Rodney Dangerfield approached his 30s, the spotlight he had chased for so long felt like a flickering bulb ready to burn out. His comedy career was going nowhere, and the man who would later become a household name was ready to pack it all in for a taste of normalcy. He met a singer named Joyce Indig, and in a move that signaled a surrender to his dreams, they both gave up their careers to get married in 1949. Rodney wasn't looking for fame anymore. He was looking for love and a quiet life. But as he would soon learn, normal didn't necessarily mean easy. Their marriage was a mixed-up affair that seemed to mirror the chaos of Rodney's early life. They had 2 children, Brian and Melanie, but the arrival of fatherhood couldn't stabilize the relationship. They divorced in 1962, only to realize they couldn't quite stay away from each other, marrying for a second time just a year later. This cycle of conflict and connection lasted until their second divorce in 1970. Even when Rodney finally launched his legendary comedy club in New York, it wasn't just about business. It was a desperate attempt to be near his family and cut out the lonely travel that had defined his career. The drama took a somber turn in 1975 when Joyce passed away, leaving Rodney to raise their children alone in his Manhattan apartment. For a man who joked about being a loser, he stepped up in a way that few saw, living a quiet, grounded life with his kids and his best friend, Joe Ancis. He remained single for years, a solitary figure in a city of millions, until a random walk into a Santa Monica flower shop in 1983 changed everything. There, he met Joan Child, and the two sparked a connection that was built to last. They took it slow, dating for a decade before finally tying the knot in 1993. Joan became his rock, his partner, and eventually the fierce protector of his legacy. But while his heart was finally full, his health was failing. Rodney was never a health nut. He was a man of excess who carried 3 different packs of cigarettes at a time. He joked that he rewarded himself for not smoking by having a smoke. That lifestyle caught up with him on his 80th birthday, right in the middle of a performance on The Tonight Show. Jay Leno noticed something was wrong and called the paramedics while Rodney was still on stage. It was the beginning of a final, grueling medical battle that would include brain surgery and a heart bypass. The end came with one last, almost poetic moment of comedy. After slipping into a coma following his heart surgery, Rodney seemed lost to the world. But his wife, Joan, knew him better than anyone. She asked him if he wanted to see a raunchy cartoon he loved, a surprise balloon gag. And amazingly, the laughter that had defined his life brought him back to consciousness. He woke up for a few more weeks, long enough to say his goodbyes, before passing away at the age of 82. Looking back, we see the man who made the world laugh by being the ultimate no-respect guy. But the reality was much more complex. Behind the bulging eyes and the jokes about his ugly face was a man who navigated a messy love life, the pain of single fatherhood, and a body that was breaking down under the weight of his habits. He gave us every ounce of humor he had, using his own struggles as the raw material for his genius. Rodney Dangerfield proved that you can carry a lifetime of pain and still leave the world with a smile, even if the gates of the neighborhood have to open just a little wider to let a legend in. But while Rodney eventually found peace in his later years, his path to the top was paved with secrets that were far more dangerous than a bad set at a comedy club. Before he was a household name, the man behind the no-respect mask was running from a past that nearly saw him trading a tuxedo for a prison jumpsuit. The FBI sting that created a legend, how Jack Roy's fraud raid led to Rodney Dangerfield. Before he was the beloved king of no respect, Rodney Dangerfield was a man living a double life that nearly ended before it began. In the mid-1950s, long before the red tie and the white shirt became his uniform, he was still Jack Roy, a guy struggling to make ends meet and desperate enough to try anything. His wife at the time hated his comedy career and pressured him to find a real job. Depressed and frustrated, he didn't just quit the stage. He stepped into a world of trouble that the public wouldn't hear about for decades. While he told the world he was selling aluminum siding, the FBI had a different story. In 1955, federal agents launched a series of pre-dawn raids, arresting a group of men accused of a massive $600,000 home repair scam. The scheme involved pretending to be war veterans selling cheap repairs to unsuspecting homeowners. But the whole thing was a fraud. One of the top men indicted in that sting was none other than Jack Roy. It was a dark, messy chapter that could have landed him behind bars for a long time. Luckily for comedy fans, the charges were eventually dropped, and Jack Roy managed to walk away without a prison sentence. But his reputation was trashed. He needed a clean slate and a new identity to bury the craziness of his past. He walked into a comedy club, asked the owner to pick a name at random, and walked out as Rodney Dangerfield. He thought the name was weird at first, but it gave him the shield he needed to reinvent himself while he was still drowning in depression and debt. By the late 1980s, Rodney had successfully buried that past and become one of the biggest stars on the planet. Movies like Back to School were breaking box office records, and he was the hottest ticket in Las Vegas. But even at the height of his fame, trouble seemed to follow him. While staying at Caesar's Palace in 1988, a malfunctioning steam bath in his suite caused a serious eye injury. When the hotel refused to pay him for the 5 shows he missed while recovering, Rodney didn't just get mad, he got even. He famously walked out on a packed house at Caesar's, telling the audience to go get their money back, and triggered a massive $5 million lawsuit. The hotel fought back hard, claiming he wasn't actually hurt and was just out partying. They even hired doctors to testify against him. But Rodney held his ground. After a heated legal battle, a jury sided with the comedian, awarding him $725,000 for his pain and suffering. In true Rodney fashion, he had the last laugh by taking his talents right across the street to perform at a rival hotel. Throughout all these legal battles and FBI investigations, Rodney kept the world laughing. We saw the confident movie star and the sharp-witted comic, but we never saw the man who was constantly running from his own history. He used his no-respect persona to mask a life that had been genuinely chaotic and, at times, dangerous. Behind the jokes about his wife or his looks was a man who had survived poverty, federal indictments, and high-stakes lawsuits. He proved that you can have a sullied name and still become a legend, as long as you're funny enough to make people forget where you came from. Rodney Dangerfield didn't just get respect in the end. He earned it by turning his deepest failures and biggest scandals into the fuel for a career that redefined American comedy. He was a survivor who knew that no matter how much life caves in, there's always a punchline waiting on the other side. Just when it seemed like Rodney Dangerfield had finally climbed out of the shadows and into the bright lights of superstardom, the world of celebrity gossip decided to take a swing at him. In the early 1990s, at the height of his fame, Star magazine published an explosive article that threatened to tear down everything he had built. The headlines were brutal, painting the 74-year-old comedian not as the lovable loser we all knew, but as a party animal who spent his days in a haze of alcohol and drugs. The tabloid claimed he was swilling vodka by the bucket load and using cocaine, transforming his no-respect persona into something much darker and more dangerous. For a man who had spent his entire life trying to escape the craziness of his past, this wasn't just a bad review. It was an all-out assault on his character. The story was filled with wild cinematic anecdotes that sounded more like a fever dream than reality. They claimed he had chased a casino worker around a hotel room with ice tongs and stood blotto in a flooded suite surrounded by naked women. Rodney had spent decades making us laugh at his own expense, but being portrayed as a predatory, out-of-control addict was a bridge too far. He decided to fight back, taking the tabloid to federal court for libel. During the trial, the curtain was pulled back on how these gossip machines actually work. The star's own attorney eventually had to admit that the ice tong incident was completely made up. It was a stunning confession that proved the tabloid was more interested in a juicy story than the actual truth. However, the legal battle took a bizarre turn. While the judge agreed that the story was false, reckless, and defamatory, he only awarded Rodney about $45,000 in damages, a tiny fraction of the $4 million he had asked for. The judge's reasoning was almost as stinging as the article itself. He noted that Rodney's public reputation was already considerably less wholesome than the California dancing raisins, suggesting that because Rodney joked so much about his own flaws, the tabloid couldn't really do much more damage to his image. It was a classic no-respect moment happening in real time, right in the middle of a federal courtroom. To make matters worse, the judge ruled that the tabloid's parent company couldn't be forced to pay more because the editorial staff technically had no assets of their own. It was a legal loophole that left Rodney's lawyers shaking their heads in disbelief. Even though Rodney won the case on paper, the victory felt small. The trial had forced him to listen to call girls and casino executives testify about his private life, dragging his name through the mud all over again. We saw the man on stage tugging at his tie and making us roar with laughter, but behind the scenes, he was fighting a war to prove he wasn't the monster the tabloids wanted him to be. He was a man in his 70s, still defending his dignity against a world that seemed determined to keep him down. This battle with the star was just another chapter in a long history of Rodney having to fight for every inch of ground he gained. From the FBI investigations of his youth to the high-stakes lawsuits of his later years, the laughter he provided us was always a shield against the chaos. We laughed because he was relatable, but we didn't always see the toll it took to be the world's favorite underdog. Rodney Dangerfield didn't just play a character who got no respect, he lived it, fighting until the very end to ensure that even if the world didn't respect him, it would at least have to tell the truth about him. In the end, he showed us that no matter how many lies are told, a legend is built on the truth of their struggle. But as the lights dimmed on his legal battles, they remained blindingly bright on the late-night stage where he became an icon. While we watched him conquer the airwaves alongside the biggest names in Hollywood, we were actually watching a man perform an act over a private darkness that most fans never knew existed. Rodney Dangerfield's final performance. The chemistry between Johnny Carson and Rodney Dangerfield was more than just good television. It was a legendary partnership that defined an entire era of comedy. Carson featured Rodney over 70 times, acting as the perfect straight man to set up the punchlines that would leave the country in stitches. Whether it was the 1971 appearance that launched him into the spotlight or the classic 1977 set where he lamented about his Essex life, famously joking that his dog taught his wife to roll over and play dead, Rodney always delivered. Even his stories about being a lost kid on the beach, where the cop told him his parents had too many places to hide, felt like a secret he was finally letting us in on. But looking back at those iconic tapes, there's a flicker of something in Rodney's eyes that most of us missed at the time. We make the mistake of assuming comedians are happy because they make us laugh. But for Rodney, humor was a life raft. Behind the bulging eyes and the sweating brow, he was locked in a lifelong battle with clinical depression. The neglect he suffered as a child, abandoned by his father and ignored by a cold mother, had left a void that even 70 standing ovations on The Tonight Show couldn't fill. As he moved into his 70s, the no-respect character started to feel less like an act and more like a heavy weight. In his autobiography, It's Not Easy Being Me, Rodney admitted that he went through a 2-year stretch where he simply couldn't function. There were days he wouldn't leave his bed, hiding under the covers as wild mood swings and dark thoughts took over. By the end of his life, his body was a chemistry set, as he found himself taking more than 100 pills a day just to keep going. To cope with the darkness, Rodney turned to self-medication, developing a 60-year daily habit with marijuana that he joked was his greatest love affair. It was a habit he took all the way to the end, even smoking in his hospital room, much to the frustration of the staff. The The cracks in his health finally showed in 2001, on his 80th birthday, when Jay Leno noticed Rodney's movements were off during a performance. He was suffering a mild stroke right there on national television, but in true Rodney fashion, he was back on that same stage just a year later. The final act began in 2003 with brain surgery, a high-stakes move to prepare his body for an even riskier heart valve replacement. As he entered the UCLA Medical Center for that final surgery in 2004, a nurse asked him how long he'd be staying. Rodney didn't skip a beat. If all goes well, about a week. If not, about an hour and a half. It was a clever one-liner that felt like a nod to the fans, a hint that he knew the curtain was coming down on his final performance. Rodney passed away on October 5, 2004, leaving a hole in the comedy world that has never been filled. In a twist of fate, the joke of the day, randomly selected for his website that morning, was about him buying a cemetery plot and the salesman saying, "There goes the neighborhood." His wife Joan knew it was the perfect parting shot, and she had those words carved onto his headstone in Westwood Village. At his memorial, the word respect was written in the sky, while friends like Farrah Fawcett released monarch butterflies into the air. It was a beautiful tribute to a man who spent 82 years convincing us he was a loser, all while becoming one of the most respected figures in history. We laughed at the pain he shared, and in return, he gave us a way to laugh at our own. Rodney Dangerfield didn't just tell jokes. He showed us that even when life doesn't give you respect, you can still leave them laughing until the very last light goes out. Were you a fan of Rodney Dangerfield? Share your thoughts with us in the communes below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.